Oh, it looks as though I am live now. Greetings, everyone, and good evening. Um, Welcome to the 2,000 subscriber celebration Ask Me Anything live thing. I'm your host, Dr. Bowers from PhD&D, and I'm just here to answer whatever questions people might want to ask me, take whatever requests people might want to offer me, discuss topics that people might want to raise. I'm really excited to talk about, of course, 5 Acts, the King in Yellow RPG, which I just did an interview with Really Dicey about. If you go over to Really Dicey's channel on YouTube, you'll see the interview that I had with Manny. Really, really excellent guy. I love his content. Interview that I had with Manny. Really, really excellent guy. I love his content. And there we sort of talk about the nature of cosmic horror, the differences between Robert W. Chambers' writing and the writing of H.P. Lovecraft, why it is exactly that people associate The King in Yellow with H.P. Lovecraft. And we even touched on, some stuff about Ravenloft, just very, very general things. But if you watch my channel or if you enjoy my channel for the Ravenloft content, of course, that's, might be of interest to you. So let's see what we got here. Aha. In terms of content for this channel, speaking of which, I'm working on the last of the Sea of Sorrows domains or subdomains, I should say. There's, of course, the Tower of Ravens, which I bet there's something in the older Ravenloft history or maybe even more recent, like 3.5 or 4E era stuff about the Tower of Ravens, because Van Richten's guide gives you precious little. It's a tower, and there are ravens, and maybe some relationship to the Raven Queen, kind of, sort of, maybe, but you really don't learn anything about it. So there's a lot you could do with that. And so I was thinking about, types of horror stories or ways that a campaign could be scary, which I haven't yet sort of discussed in the other Ravenloft adventure videos. So I was thinking about the horror of being in kind of a randomized prison or a kind of maze with many different sorts of killer parts, almost like a classical D&D Grimtooth Traps style dungeon. I'm thinking of the movie Cube, as well as the the classic AD&D adventure, The Dancing Hut of Baba Yaga, with these like weird random sorts of rooms in them. So sort of playing with that maybe as some inspiration for the Tower of Ravens, if something else doesn't occur to me. And then when it comes to Vigilant Bluff, right? Vigilant Bluff, what we learn about it is there's an undead paladin, and duty or his duties or his sort of oath is very important to him, and he kills people who don't stick to it. So a lot to work with there. I'm in particular looking at a story by Clark Ashton Smith called Necromancy in Nayat, which is it's a story about some bluffs sticking out of the sea, and there's a cabal of necromancers, treacherous necromancers, residing there, and our ill-fated protagonist goes to them in the search of his long-lost love. And I'm thinking about what goes on in that story and its sort of mood and flavor, and kind of thinking of mixing it with other horror stories that involve obligation, right? Where the horror is at least partially due to something that you've agreed to ahead of time, and now you've got to hold up your end of the bargain. So I'm thinking of, on one hand, you've got stuff like the Green Knight and the myth of the Green Knight. You've also got stuff like Rumpelstiltskin, like agreeing to give up your firstborn. Spooky. Hey, welcome, Jack. Hey, I just found your channel recently. Love it. I just ran a version of Daemon Liu and borrowed a lot from your video on it. Grand Masquerade is next session. Oh, that's great. That's really lovely to hear. I hope it goes well. I really enjoyed putting that adventure together, and I found it does it does have some mixed reviews. On one hand, there are a lot of tables who report really enjoying it, but on the other hand, I've heard from about a few tables where people sort of, hello, Jason from Ravenlore. We are blessed or cursed with the presence of a fellow Dark Lord and YouTuber. Really excellent stuff. Check out Ravenlore, by the way. But some folks, I've gotten some feedback where the problem with my Daemon Liu adventure was that the players almost immediately recognize that they're playing through some kind of Cinderella story. And so since they know Cinderella already, they know its story beats, they suddenly become less interested in what's going to happen to them in the adventure. But that hasn't been the majority of feedback, but I have gotten some of that feedback. So good to hear that that your table is having fun with it. They don't trust the hag, so they went off the rails. And oh yeah, and definitely, I think if the players are doing that, you don't want to nudge them too hard, right? Let them let them explore the options and find out that like trying to rob a fried cheese cart or trying to do other way, find other ways around the problem, that these are ways both to characterize the domain and sort of expose what horrors there are in it, as well as for the players to just kind of learn, well, maybe you should go back and listen to the hag again, sort of thing. One thing I want to mention now that you've brought this up. Thanks, Jason. Yeah, thank you to Ravenlore, Jason. Not to be confused, me. Also, I'm Jason. But one thing I wanted to mention about these Ravenloft adventure videos is in every single one of them, I say that we're going to sketch out an adventure, right? We're going to sketch out an adventure, and I use the term sketch quite deliberately. Because on one hand, I don't want it to just be like a strict railroad, right? If you're running this adventure, you must go through exactly these steps or something. I want there to be some room to improvise or for players to like come up with their own stuff there. But I do want it to be enough of in the same way that a sketch is enough of an outline to let you know what's supposed to kind of be there, the general shape of the thing. They're meant to provide that sort of general shape. Anarcho-Possum, hey, PhD&D, absolutely love your content. Thank you. I always enjoy seeing your comments on the videos. There's a lot of cool suggestions and insights. I have a question. Yes. Is there another genre of horror not found in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft that you would love to or are preparing to tackle? Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, because earlier I did mention that Ravenloft tends to be missing. It's missing like an 80s slasher horror domain, and it's missing a kaiju horror domain. And I did, sort of videos on those with Camp Silver Lake and Dutchman's Creek, respectively. But what still is left out? I wonder. I'm thinking about. So one of the things that this is a really good question. I think one shortcoming of Van Richten's Guide, maybe in terms of genres of horror, doesn't necessarily come from just Van Richten's Guide. But it's more the fact that you're playing D&D, right? So does 5e handle psychological horror really well? Well, it can. Does it handle it as well as some other systems or something? And there I might think like, psychological horror where you're not sure if what you're perceiving is real. The horror of having like a high fever and you think you see things that aren't there. That kind of the horror of hallucination, psychedelic horror. That's one where I bet there are some domains in Van Richten's Guide where you could play with that, but I don't recall seeing any that were really like the focus. I mean, you might say Dominia is because it's a Victorian madhouse, but but they don't really say that in there. They just sort of, if anything, they sort of emphasize that the vampire doctor has a bunch of his clones there, and then that's supposed to be the theme. So I might say like psychedelic horror, right? Like horror where the monsters might be hallucinations, and even if they are, that doesn't make them any less dangerous. Trying to think of there like the Twilight Zone episode where the fellow is killed by things that he sees in his dream. I guess there's some Nightmare Land stuff you could play with that, but that's off the top of my head. I would go in that direction. There's also of course like sci-fi horror and stuff. I know Gabriel Jensen has worked on that collection, the Dread Space, which is on DM's Guild, and it deals with some like outer space horror, like the movie Alien and stuff like that. Also some stuff like influenced by Dune, which I thought was interesting. As for what horror I'm sort of taking on myself, I am working on that uh, indie game. I'm I'm the creative director and writer of the game 5 Acts: The King in Yellow RPG, which is this game about. It's a game where the players are sort of unreliable narrators, where they themselves, it seems as if they're in possession of great powers and they're facing horrific things, but they could also just be delusional. So there's a little bit of that there, but Nightmare Lands could work for that. Jack's absolutely right. Yeah. Yeah, or Dominia. Yeah, yeah. See, there are some types of horror fiction, I think, which you could fit into one or another of the Ravenloft domains that we get. I think that we get enough domains where you can, for the most part, you can find what you're looking for, in these other in the ones that they give you. For instance, when I proposed a kaiju horror domain and I was talking about Dutchman's Creek, I got a lot of comments suggesting like, oh, you could also do this in, for instance, Lamordia. There was some suggestions that the Sleeping Beast, which is a mountain range, could be like a literal description, right? And people were proposing other sorts of places you could go in the domains of dread to get a kaiju besides just coming up with another domain. So I do think that, or at least it seems like, we have enough domains, at least in Ben Richten's guide, where you could, if you were looking for a certain flavor of horror, you could probably find one or another to put it in. But you got to start throwing out the ability for players to make checks. Oh yeah, yeah. You know what? There was a now that I remember it, there was the old here it is. Oh, where is it? Here we go. This old William Connors one, Web of Illusion. This old Ravenloft adventure is pretty delightful. My own adventure, Phantasms of Sri Raji, was an attempt to kind of not redo this or remake it, but to sort of take it and embellish it and sort of recast a lot of its ideas and build on them and do a different twist in some cases. But it had this feature which I thought was kind of neat, where if players wanted to, they could at any point try to disbelieve something in front of them, right? See whether the thing in front of them was real or an illusion. Because this adventure featured Rakshasas, and in particular Arijani, and they're masters of illusion. They like to, and Arijani has these like layered illusions, right? So there'll be like a fake pit trap, and if the players disbelieve it, they'll see, that pit trap isn't there. But then it turns out that there's a real pit trap like right next to it, which is covered with a different illusion, and tricky stuff like that. I thought that was a fun little mechanic, and yeah, you could sort of do that as Jason was suggesting with Raven lore. Speaking of Forlorn, have the kaiju awaken and kill Aggie as the. Oh yeah, yes. I gotta do Forlorn still. That's a really fun domain because it has sort of this time travel element, and you also have an undead lake monster, undead sea monster Aggie, and also Oliver Darkshire. I think that's his name. Yeah, Oliver Darkshire on DM's Guild did a sort of a reimagining of the original Castles Forlorn by Lisa Spedman. I think his is called Standing Forlorn, and I haven't read through it thoroughly. I've sort of looked at it and admired bits of it and thought, wow, this is a lot of dedication to Forlorn. I'm looking forward to running it sometime, but I feel like I have to at least give it a thorough read and maybe run parts of it before jumping in and doing a Forlorn video. Otherwise, I won't have done my research. Currently working on my Ustren domain. Oh yeah, what you mentioned in the Discord. And in developing survival horror, where the PCs need to manage their resources, for instance. Do you have any tips or ideas? Yes. So this is a great topic. Resource management and survival in D&D. So one thing about 5e, of course, is that it's already a game about resource management. You roll a d20 to meet or beat a certain number, and if you do, then you manage resources. Either hit points change, or spell slots change, or something changes. Key points change. And so 5e players, they're already, like, all the cool stuff on their sheet is already attached to a lot of resource management. And I think this is why it is that um, a lot of 5e players find the management of things like rations and water kind of tedious, right? It's like a bunch of extra calculation just to achieve, at least in most cases, like just a certain sort of story effect where it's like, yeah, this is pretty dire, right, kind of thing. So I was thinking about like a different way of just running uh food and water and stuff in fifth edition. I thought, like, why don't you give each player, and there's going to be certain things that you don't get to do, certain intricacies that get glossed over by simplifying it this way, but instead of having like individual days of rations that you keep track of and gallons of water and you explain how you're carrying it all and all that, um you sort of abstract that away, and instead you have sort of a meter, right? Kind of like hit points, but instead of tracking hit points, you're tracking like ration points or something, right? And you could just say that each character is expected to carry around a bunch of rations. We're going to say that it's your strength modifier plus your hit die per level, and that's going to be the amount of food points you have or whatever. And then you just deplete it by a certain amount per day or something, and then you can replenish these in the same way that you replenish hit points on a long rest. You lose food points on a long rest, but you can gain them if you do a long rest in a town or something, right? Like, I've always wanted to. I've very frequently wanted to run adventures in 5e that depend on scarcity and desperate survival in the wilderness, where you're really looking for the means by which to stay alive, and like a don't starve kind of situation. But the business of tracking the rations is always kind of it's sort of been a drag to a lot of the play, to a lot of the player's experience. So I have been thinking about ways to change how you do resources, and I thought, you have this cool Darkest Dungeon mechanic that Core Artificer, implemented, where you just have a second set of hit points that are sort of your stress meter. Like, you could do that with a lot of things. You could do that with rations, right? So I had some ideas about that. Um, uh, that's all the sort of that, I guess that's much more of like a redesign idea than it is like a suggestion about how to. I would say give one of the players the job of just keeping track of the food and water. I think that might make it all a lot easier, is if you just say, we have food and water as a group, and I'm going to keep track of, Jenny or Nick or someone can keep track of our food or water. That might make it easier to do that. Do 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 do. Webb is the Lost Fifth Grand Conjunction book. Oh yeah, I remember the Grand Conjunction as the meta narrative in second edition and stuff, and Aslan's efforts to escape. Question: if you had to make a short list of your favorite pre-5e Ravenloft books to buy, ooh, what would it be? Okay, so I'm definitely biased because I would say the adventure When Black Roses Bloom by Lisa Smedman. The boxed set Castles Forlorn by Lisa Smedman. I just her work is great. I think the adventure Adam's Wrath is pretty cool. I forgot who wrote that though. Who wrote that? And maybe one of like the monstrous compendiums, like volume 3 or something. I mean, because if I was limited to just picking a few, like a short list, I would actually go with those, the adventures and the monster guide, right? They give you a lot of ideas about things to run and ways to tell a scary campaign. I think the lore books are neat too, but the lore books don't provide you the same sort of direction that an adventure might. They don't. Oh, of course, Howls in the Night too. The adventure Howls in the Night, absolutely. Howls in the Night is a must have. I think that's like a classic low level Ravenloft adventure. Night of the Walking Dead too. That's just a good old zombie kind of thing. Night of the Walking Dead is pretty cool. That'd be a short list. I mean, I love the lore books. You know, the red box set was always like dear to my heart when I was younger, and I always enjoyed just reading and rereading the Domains and Denizens and the Realm of Terror books. But I think that like as a DM, if you were limited to just a few books from like pre fifth edition Ravenloft, I would actually go for the adventures first. I would go for the adventures and maybe like one of the cool monster compendiums, because they give you plenty of ideas about what to run and how to run it, and they already implicitly contain tons of Ravenloft lore, enough for you to kind of get the logic of the setting. If you were like, you know, if of course you know you're going on an 8-hour flight or something, you want like something to really, you know, immerse yourselves in the settings details, then go to the lore books, of course. Good question. These are great questions. Not Aggie. Forlorn is 2 videos away. Let's work on something. Yeah, we should. We should. Yeah, that would be a cool thing to time, is like if you have a thing that you're doing on Forlorn and I can like prepare a thing on Forlorn, and then we can have a, you know, it's Forlorn month. I think Hour of the Raven has already done a like a Forlorn video. But I wonder if there's some other thing like related. You can do an Aggie video. You can pressure him to do an Aggie video. Do you just happen to know all the stories and movies you recommend when making recommendations for a domain, or do you have to do a bunch of research? Both. In some cases, there are just bits of media that I'm familiar with, and I'm reminded of them when I consider the domain. But with increasing frequency, I do research, because the earliest videos were like me being very enthusiastic about like bits of media I already knew, and it's like, oh, this would be perfect for this. Oh, this would be perfect for that. And I've lost none of my enthusiasm, but I am now sort of taking in lots of new media in order to make sure I have things to talk about. And so you know, for the last few months, I would say for the last maybe 5 or 6 months, you know, I decide which sort of video I'm going to do, and then it's like, hey, anybody have any recommendations for horror stories about headlessness or losing your head? And then of course I go and I do research, and you know, I look things up, and I go through bookshelves and stuff. So I think more recently I do kind of outside research, to try to track down um, media for an inspirational grip. But sometimes I'll just, you know, like there are also just some favorite scary stories I've got, and I don't yet have a domain to put them in, but I can't wait to recommend them. So a little bit of both. At a certain point, do you feel as we strive for a greater sense of realism, we instead break immersion or immersion? Yeah. I think you mean like immersion in the, yeah. I mean, it depends on how we pursue a greater sense of realism. Because one way that you could try to pursue a greater sense of realism is by incorporating as many mechanics as possible for every little situation, so that there's realism about everything. So you have a facing mechanic, and you have a armor class that does and does not include your dexterity bonus, right? Flat-footed versus, you know, normal. And then you've got armor class that's only your dexterity bonus. And then you've got, you know, are you hungry or not? We'll have that affect something, right? And it could be that, you know, if you're pursuing realism by adding mechanics and adding complexity so that it matches the complexity of real life, at that point, right, it's going to break immersion, because you're suddenly just doing calculations, right? You're just, you know, you're I think this is, I saw a video about this recently. There's an interesting tension between what you might call the fantasy of the game, right? The sort of fantasy that you have of what the game is about, right? Whether it's solving mysteries or fighting monsters or whatever, there's a certain fantasy. And then there's how that fantasy is meant to be implemented in the mechanics, right? Like which dice system are we going to use in order to implement the fantasy of killing monsters, or the fantasy of, you know, drowning at sea, or whatever your game is about. One thing I really like about indie games these days is they are pursuing some very creative and wild ideas about the, you know, what fantasy you want to pursue. But yeah, I think that, you know, there's a problem where if you're trying to add mechanics, because the more mechanics you have, the more realistic it is, then at a certain point, it's going to seem like you're filling out a spreadsheet, and the fantasy is far, far, far away. Or at least that's my experience. If you've ever encountered people who say that they find not just 5e easier to play than, say, Pathfinder, but that they can really like their imagination can get more involved at the table. Whereas if they're filling out a 3.5 sheet, they might be distressed at how many different proficiencies there are, and CMD versus a CMB stuff and stuff like that. That was a neat, deep question. Thank you, Onier or Wenier. Hey, Avalon the Eldritch Horror. Welcome. Thank you very much for your comments on the videos. Thanks everyone. Adam's Wrath was also Lisa Smedman. So basically, I primarily recommend Lisa Smedman stuff. Oh yeah, Hour of the Knife. Hour of the Knife is a great one. Yeah, I'm gonna have to do a video on Jericia, I think is how you say it. It's got a ZH, which makes me think it's an aspirated Z. It's like Je. So Jericia. And that's the domain that includes, I think in 5th edition, it's like the domain that Soto the doppelganger stalked around Jack the Ripper style in, but then it's been merged with Timor, that city where everything seems nice, but then underneath in the sewers you've got like horrible alien monster things. I'm looking forward to covering that one. Apparently it's like a lot of different sorts of Victorian slasher tropes kind of merged together. Yeah, Hour of the Knife is great. Yeah, Hour of the Raven already did Forlorn. So we'll probably have to watch that again too. Do I have a favorite domain? I love them all. I think okay, so I'm gonna leave out the domains that I came up with, and maybe stick to. I guess I really it's simplistic, but in its simplicity, I find it fascinating. The road, the road on which you can encounter the headless rider. What's that called? Can't believe I'm forgetting the name of the thing. But you know which one I'm talking about. It's the Writer's Bridge, of course. The Writer's Bridge. Oh yeah, you got it. The Writer's Bridge. I mean, a lot of these I had sort of fun working on. I guess early on my favorite domain was Chlor, because I just found it so cosmic and vast and mysterious, and I really identified with the sort of the existential horror about seeing your world go closer and closer to the sun, or in this case, like a thing that eats suns. But as a child, I had a series of nightmares about the Twilight Zone episode, The Midnight Sun, which is about the planet Earth somehow getting dislodged from its orbit and going closer and closer to the sun. Everybody is doomed, but the story focuses on a pair of women who are just struggling to survive for as long as they can in an apartment complex. And a lot of things are off screen, so they just describe it. They describe the riots at the grocery stores. They describe how the fear of trying to walk the streets, the inability to distinguish day from night because it's the sky just doesn't look that way anymore. And just the horror of Earth approaching the sun, and thinking about the vastness of the sun and how helpless you would be. I immediately thought of that when I read the description for Chlor, and I thought, now this is a different sort of domain, right? This is interesting. This is definitely like a new idea grafted onto a well-beloved campaign setting. So early on, my favorite adventure was or favorite domain was Chlor, I guess, of the 5th edition domains. I mean, if you go back to earlier, before Chlor was designed as a domain, I guess I'd probably go with I liked Scythicus. I guess because when I was a kid and I was reading 2nd edition Ravenloft, I was really into the Dragonlance novels too. So reading James Lowder's Knight of the Black Rose, and then picking up When Black Roses Bloom. I really like that kind of setting. Once I once I started working on the Writer's Bridge, I found that there's a lot of really interesting literary stuff you can do with it, especially with the story by Moreno Garcia, The Husband Stitch, very horrific and deep sort of story. Blaustein I like a lot too. It has a lot of literary depth in the same way. They're both sort of based on this like weird folktale idea that has, sort of gendered horror and social horror sort of wrapped up in it. So I like those. I guess more recently, I've been a fan of those domains. Uh, the design of Chlor. Oh yeah, the design of Chlor. It was basically I was thinking of the Midnight Sun, the Twilight Zone episode, the Midnight Sun. It's got to be from like the early mid '60s or something. Is there a domain I don't like or are disappointed with? Oh, that's a good question. I can tell you there are domains I'm a little frustrated with because they're the ones I'm working on right now. Damn it. The domains for the Sea of Sorrows in 5th edition, I like them, but there's so little to work with. It's in some cases I'm like, what are you going for? What's the thing? What's the idea? What's the vision here? Like, what's the scary idea supposed to be about this tower with ravens? What are you like? Anything? I mean, one of the main inspirations for coming up with these lists of sources, right? Or as I say, that'll help you get an imaginative grip, right? I know that like with certain short works of short fiction and movies and video games, right? They can really inform the imagination and help you know, as it were, how to go on, like how to fill in and tell more stories like that, right? They help you get enough of the flavor where then you can make it in your own kitchen, so to speak. And I just don't like with the with the Sea of Sorrows ones here. I just don't know what we're supposed to do. I mean, I guess I appreciate the freedom to just put whatever strikes my fancy there, but it's hard to tell what they're going for in some cases. Yeah, domains. I mean, I guess I kind of loved all the domains. Good question. I'll consider if there are any domains I don't like as much or are disappointed with. Chlor video is inspiring. Thank you. Speaking about horror that's only described, have I seen Pontypool? Ooh, yeah. That's an interesting little work. They did a lot with what was obviously a shoestring budget there, and it's interesting, right? So Pontypool is, I don't know, spoilers for Pontypool, I guess. I don't think this is the sort of spoiler which will prevent you from enjoying it. In fact, this is the kind of thing you'd put on the back of the box if you were renting it at a movie store when those existed. But in Pontypool there's zombies, but the source of the zombie curse is like it's not a meme, but it's sort of like there's like a way of talking where if you hear someone talk that way, then you talk that way. And like as you talk that way, it also affects the way that you continue to talk, so that you kind of like your speech patterns get simpler and more violent, and then you act more violent, and then like people become zombies because of like this weird like meme talk that kind of spreads. And then much of the film is excitingly set in sort of a radio studio where there's like a shock jock DJ kind of guy who's like bound up with this mystery of where are the zombies coming from. It's very, very cool. Yeah, Pontypool, good pull there, Ravenlore. Good pull, Jason. Yeah, that's a classic one. I have to take a look. Maybe we can do a video on like variants on the zombie. What do you think about a game where your players are the Dread Domain Lord and his minions, but have to survive the onslaught of adventurers pouring into their domain from the mists? That would be fun. It sounds like the game that you might want to use a different engine for, though, than 5e. I guess so. So one complication is if you want multiple players, they're going to be like multiple Dark Lords, right? So either you're going to have a domain where they all share like they're mutual Dark Lords, right? Like Ivana Baritsi and Ivan Delisnia, but like 5 of them or however many players you have. And that's fine. It'll just maybe take some imaginative work. Maybe part of the fun could be collectively coming up with what the domain is and why all the PCs are cursed in it. Or you're going to have like, I don't know, like separate campaigns for these separate Dark Lords in their own domains, and then they could occasionally interact in the way that like Soth and Strahd and Azalen could occasionally interact. Maybe something like that. But it sounds like, to be honest, it sounds kind of like a resource management game or something, where it's like, here you are, here's the lord of your Lord of Barovia, you are Strahd von Zarovich, and you can tell from your Dark Lord's sense that there's a vampire hunter somewhere in Vallaki, and so you go on a quest to try to find him. And I mean, that could be fun. I mean, I guess, you know what, if you were going to try to do that with 5th edition, you might pick up the Ghostfire Gaming's supplement, what's it called, Grim Hollow, because I think they have some pretty good rules, pretty well thought out rules for like playing vampires and playing liches and stuff. I think that there's still, you're still playing 5e, so there's the expectation that players, they start out a bit weaker and then they level up and get more powerful. I don't know if Dark Lords, if that goes along with the theme of playing a Dark Lord where you level up and get more powerful, but I think it's an interesting idea. You might, I don't know. You might like focus on a game system that's about, like going on a journey or like going on a quest to, find the vampire hunter. That's a good question. I'm not sure how to go about playing as a Dark Lord. I mean, I can see how it might be a fun thing. Who doesn't want to play as the bad guy, right? What do we got here? Is there any kind of horror tropes, themes? Way to flip on its head. Yes. Are there any kind of horror tropes or themes or like you find difficult to implement or showcase in regards to D&D and beyond it? Yeah, I think that the more I think the more like intimate and psychological the horror is, the less it has to do with your spell slots or your ability scores, and the more just sort of psychological and narrative it becomes. So one of the things that happens is if you want to tell a story about PCs who recently lost their loved ones and now they stay in a spooky house, and you want to dramatize the appearance of ghosts so that what's scary is the possibility that the ghosts are real, or maybe they're just the projected misery or the projected feelings of the protagonist. If you want to tell like a gothic ghost story like that, I don't, if you try using 5th edition, you're going to have to somehow connect it to like, the stuff that 5th edition characters have, like spell slots and attacks and action surge and stuff, right? So this is why even in like a domain that's supposed to be full of gothic ghost stories like Mordant, you have to make room for fighting some ghosts, because that's what 5e is about. The tools that characters get, the tools that PCs get, are mostly about killing monsters, fighting monsters, attacking monsters with magic and weapons. 5e is really a lot about that, and so because it's mainly about that, I think it's difficult to implement horror tropes that are more intimate, more psychological, more about your feelings and things like that. Of course, I bet there are some people who either watching or not. I bet there's some folks who just like, they've mastered that particular art of running a Wuthering Heights and in 5th edition or something. So yeah, good questions. These are all great questions. Thanks, everyone. Van Richten would be an enemy NPC with lots of knowledge for the adventurers to learn your weakness. Yeah, you could. Okay, so this would be a fun. So I don't know about playing as the Dark Lord, but this is a good point from Eduardo Art. Thanks. What if you had a campaign where every PC was a Dampier, and you were running it as a slasher horror campaign, but the villain wasn't like, a typical monster. It's Van Richten, right? Like you and the other PCs are Dampiers, or maybe you're Reborn or Hexblood, but you take one of the Ravenloft, subclasses, one of the spooky ones, and they have to contend with Van Richten, who is hunting them down, laying traps for them, maybe stalking them and chasing them through a dense forest whose contours make it sufficiently like a dungeon where it could count as one. It's full of traps which Van Richten laid, right? I can see how that would be a fun thing to do. And that way you remove the complexity of having them be the Dark Lord specifically, right? I would run that. That'd be fun. Ooh, we should do that for a video. Good idea. Thank you. Favorite accidental horror movie? One where it wasn't meant to be scary, but for whatever reason turned out to be terrifying. Oh, there's a few of these. A lot of these are like childhood movies, right? For me, at least. So one that comes immediately to mind is Return to Oz, right? Starring a young Fairuza Balk, right? That is a horror movie, and it was marketed to children, as being the anticipated follow-up sequel to everyone's frolicsome Hollywood Golden Age classic, The Wizard of Oz, right? And it's like this gothic, gloomy heart, like oh my god, it's 80s goth horror with the deadly desert that destroys you and turns your body to sand if you touch it, and these weird nightmarish wheeler things, and all these people that get turned to stone. Oz is like this horrible, dreary, nightmarish wheeler things, and all these people that get turned to stone. Oz is like this horrible, dreary, post-apocalyptic, wasteland. Oh man, that is a horror movie which I don't, whether it was intended to be one is one question, but definitely wasn't marketed as one. So definitely Return to Oz is an accidental horror movie, Mr. Welch. Great question, by the way. And thank you. Another one, lesser known, I've mentioned it in my video on ICATH, is the Japanese animated, and this was intended for children, again, film Unico and the Island of Magic. And this is just, it's a film that's full of like frightening imagery, but especially the imagery of people being turned into inanimate puppets, these like weird animatronic things. And it includes like a very like heart-wrenching scene where a young man turns his own parents into these puppets because an evil wizard forces him to. And the wizard is something out of nightmares. He lives in the castle that's made out of petrified people, and it's got a lot of scary imagery where I would say, yeah, Unico and the Island of Magic is another accidental horror movie. Those are two. And I've got a list of others somewhere. If I think of them, I'll come back to them. That's great. And Chad, welcome. Chad C. Goodman Parker himself, member of our development team here, or helping us. How excited are you for the new 2024 updated rule books? Pretty excited. I'm definitely curious, and I'm enthusiastic to see what they've done. So far, the character class videos that I've seen on the official D&D channel are all, I think the changes they pretty much seem agreeable. I haven't heard a single change where I thought, what, that ruins the whole class. I've just, it seems in a lot of cases they're responding to, the way that fans have, the way that players have homebrewed the classes anyway, or requests or discussion from the forums, and questions from Sage Advice, or requests or discussion from the forums, and questions from Sage Advice. I'm excited to see what they do with the spells, because it sounds like the spells in particular have been updated in a way where the questions people constantly ask about them are going to be answered in the spell description. So I assume that in the 2024 version of Moonbeam, right, it'll say why you cannot just strafe the moonbeam across the battlefield and like hit every single person, or go back and forth between two squares and like hit the same one again and again and again with your moonbeam. It'll just say that in there instead of forcing DMs to consult Sage Advice and explain to the player who wants to do it. So I'm excited about that part. I expect, okay, so really, I think that the 2024 changes so far they seem to be very little. It seems like it's still more or less going to be 5th edition. You're still going to be playing basically the same game just with a few little things changed here and there. Uh, what else about the new rule books? I'm curious to see how they're going to accommodate players who want to play a necromancer wizard, right? Because if you saw their wizard update video, it's like you got 4 kinds of wizard, and necromancer ain't one of them. You can play you can play what as a illusionist and an evoker and a diviner and a conjurer. I think those are the ones. No transmutation, no necromancy. So I mean, I approve of the idea of reducing the number of wizard subclasses. That's a lot. And I approve of the idea of maybe basing the wizard subclasses not on specific spell schools, but just on ways you might handle the magic, right? So you might be the sort of person that uses necromancy to create weird spectral illusions, right? Or you might be the sort of person who uses necromancy to blast the flesh off your opponents. And that would be like, an illusionist necromancer or an evoker necromancer. So I'm sort of curious to see how they accommodate the very clearly existing player interest in being a necromancer. How are you going to accommodate that with the subclasses that you've laid out? I'd love to see. Or maybe they're expecting the players who want to run a necromancer, maybe they're expecting those players to go over to like the warlock or something and get their spooky vibes there. That might be it. Ideas about how to use Tobin the Many in a campaign. I have not. I love Tobin the Many. What a fun character. A hive mind zombie, right? A zombie and he every single zombie in a horde shares the same mind, and they sort of all share the same thoughts, as well as seeing out of each other's eyes. And they all, what's weird and spooky is that if anybody gets killed by them, their face like contorts and twists into this huge grin, and it's called the Tobin grin. And you can recognize a Tobin zombie because it's got the Tobin grin. And they can all talk with his voice, right? And so it's just spooky. How would you run an adventure featuring Tobin the Many? You'll want to. Okay, so I assume it would be a low-level adventure because you're going to be fighting zombies. Zombies are scarier and more interesting when it's lower level against lower level PCs. And the easiest thing to do would be to find an adventure, either old or new, or part of an adventure that already has like a zombie horde situation or already a zombie thing going on. And then turn the zombies to Tobin would be one thing to do. You might, let's see, what would be a fun adventure to reskin? I don't know if it would work to reskin Night of the Walking Dead, because that has other things going on there. Yeah, which adventure? I'm not sure, but I think the thing to do would be to find, part of an adventure where you're besieged by zombies, or a town slowly comes to be overrun by zombies, but you make it very clear that the zombies are Tobin, and you can sort of have some intrigue. This would be fun because the PCs would have to engage with the question of who the hell is this Tobin guy, and go to a library or to some occult wizard and like try to do research, right, and find out who Tobin was, and discover that Tobin is actually tethered to existence by the power of the MacGuffin, and so they have to go and destroy the MacGuffin. I mean, that's sort of an outline. I would love to do an adventure with Tobin the Many, though. That one of my favorite Ravenloft villains ever, especially if you're looking at villains that aren't Dark Lords, right? Tobin is just a lovely. I think he appeared in the third 3.5 edition guide, Van Richten's Guide to the Walking Dead. That was a great book. That was a wonderful source book on just corporeal undead monsters, from ghouls to zombies to having that, and it had that really neat lore about the grimoire that Aslan used to raise the dead. It was called the Raiment of Clarity. Just spooky, great stuff there. Yeah, Tobin the Many would be great. I haven't already done a video on a civilian victim of Havana syndrome, so I think I should, and in this case, I guess I probably will. Good suggestion. when I DM, where does my version of Ravenloft fit in my cosmology? Is it all there is? Is it a corner of the Shadowfell? Is it a possibility? Any possibility for your PCs to leave, however difficult that may be. Um, I usually think of so I've had some arguments with people about this, and I don't mean like antagonistic argument, but interesting, differing, disagreeing discussions. I tend to think that the realm of the mists, or the Ravenloft mists as they were, and all the mists, or the Ravenloft mists as they were, and all the little domains therein. All of that taken together just is the Shadowfell. The Shadowfell is just another name for all the Ravenloft domains taken together, along with the mists that connect them. And just sort of think of it that way. And likewise, I assume the Feywild is a series of these domains of delight, where I assume the Feywild, like every single domain, is like a different version of comedy, right? A different take on comedy, or a different take on whimsy, in the way that, like, every Ravenloft domain is a different take on horror, a different subgenre of horror. And they're in the same way that the mists connect the Ravenloft domains, the domains of the Shadowfell. I assume there'd be an analogous connecting thing, whether it's the Fairy Road or the Yellow Brick Road or whatever, that is some other thing that sort of connects all the domains of delight. But I remember early, like, I think the Shadowfell Feywild stuff, I feel like that might have come along in 4th edition, or was it 3.5? I remember when it came out, I was like a little grumpy about it as a kid. I was like, no, I didn't. What's this Shadowfell thing? Where's my Ravenloft? But over time, you can kind of see. I like how 5th edition sort of handled it, where they just sort of identified them. Now, that being said, one thing that I almost always have in my Ravenloft adventures is near total ignorance about the status of the Shadowfell as a place separate from the material plane. Right, the people that live in the Shadowfell, they just think it's the world. Right, if they live in in Barovia, they don't they don't say, here we are trapped in Ravenloft, or here, this is a domain of dread. They don't know any of that stuff. They think Barovia just is the world, or whichever domain they're in. I think there are some cases where it's, and people disagree with me on this too, but I think there are lots of domains of dread where the people who live in them don't even know their names. This is especially true where the domain has a really spooky sounding, kind of silly, to the point of sounding silly name, right? Like Odiare, right? Like, in order for that to sound like a cool name, you have to not be aware that it's just the Italian word for hate. It's just like, I live in the village of hate. It's like, are you a member of a black metal band? What is this? Right? Like, it's a little corny. I assume that the people who live in Odiare, they probably think their town has an ordinary name or something. And that its true name, its domain of dread name, is Odiare or something. Like what are the chances that the evil paladin on the Vigilant Bluffs calls it the Vigilant Bluffs? He might just call it my realm or whatever. Maybe its true name, in the way that fairies have true names. Maybe domains of dread have true names, And some of them, like Barovia, people who live in Barovia know it's called Barovia. But then there's others where it's like, the Nightmare Lands. Are you sure that's maybe? Like, I can see, but also maybe not. Gehenna, again, like I assume that the people who live there, they probably refer to the place they live as the land or the world, and they probably refer to individual cities. But like, it's weird to me that they would call it Gehenna. It's just like, I live in Sadsville. I don't know. It takes me out of it. So I think that, like, my Ravenloft denizens, they tend to not know that they're in Ravenloft. And in some cases, they don't even know, like, the identity of a domain that they're in as a Ravenloft domain. They might even call it something else. Now, what that means is that the PCs, I like to have campaigns, if they're long-term Ravenloft campaigns, I like for the PCs to be able to discover that they're in a cursed, expanse of dread domains. Or I like it if they can encounter the one lone wizard or lich or someone who actually knows this deep metaphysical stuff about the domains, that knows the land's true name or something. That is sort of how I like to run my Ravenloft denizens. But I like to make PCs, at least, over time, increasingly different from that. Return to Oz was terrifying. Wasn't there a duchess who collected heads and put them on? Yes, Queen Mombi. And from what I understand, she's actually taken from another book that isn't Return to Oz, like a different L. Frank Baum book. But yeah, I loved that. Speaking of scenes that gave me nightmares as a kid, is the scene when Dorothy goes into the cabinet, into the big old walk-in closet full of heads, and all the heads are like sleeping, right? And she's like sneaking and trying to, you know, she's trying to like steal a key or something from around the neck of one of the sleeping heads, and she wakes it up, and then every single head in the entire chamber, their eyes snap open and they begin to scream and yell with anger. And then, this alerts Mombi's headless body, who then gets up and is like staggering towards her and trying to grapple her. Oh, and it's just the stuff out of nightmares. It's delightful. And that was a very scary scene. Yeah, thanks for reminding me. Yeah. Yeah. I should have mentioned her in the writer's bridge video. Maybe I did. If I didn't, I should have. Neverending Story is also absolutely terrifying. Ortex drowning in the swamp, and oh god, yeah, the wolf thing. I forgot its name. It's like he doesn't have anything directly to do with the nothing, but it acts as its herald. Sort of likes the idea of it. And there's a very scary puppet from that movie. Yes, I remember at the end, it's all misty and Atreyu's there, and he's all bloody, and the wolf is like, "If you come any closer, I'll rip you to shreds." And like, this is a kid's movie. Yeah, there's a lot of I really enjoyed those sort of 80s fantasy films that are pitched for kids, but then full of like really macabre imagery. Or the scene from The Dark Crystal, when creatures have their essence drained of them in the Mad Skeksis laboratory, right, where they take one of the podlings and they strap it to a chair, like they're Alex from A Clockwork Orange, and then they shine some like light into the eyes of the podlings, and you watch their little cute Muppet faces shrivel and become mindless, and their eyes become pale, and then they're just, like that's some unintentional horror too. Is stuff from The Dark Crystal. Maybe not as intense as some of the others we've mentioned as Return to Oz, but still. Fievel, An American Tale. There's some spooky things in there too. The Monster That Is a Machine, absolutely. And yeah, that's what it was. Fievel Goes West. Have I played Blades in the Dark? I've looked through the source book, which I've got here on my shelf. One thing I did notice is it has like a built-in like setting, like a pretty expansive one with some detail in it. And you say, oh yeah, it's that person 289. You're in a haunted Victorian city trapped inside a wall of lightning powered by demon blood. Yeah, it could be a domain of dread, easily. And I think you could run Ravenloft Domains of Dread using the Blades in the Dark system. I mean, it seems pretty clear. You just want to make sure that whatever the adventure is in the Domain of Dread has got to be something where you're on a timer, or there's a tense situation you're trying to escape from or break into. But basically, any excuse to use their trademark mechanic, the progress clock. Like the Blaustein adventure I sketched out, you could probably run something like that with the progress clock, where it's like you're trying to find where you're trying to convince the bride that she's married to a monster, try to, you're on a clock to do that maybe. But I haven't actually run Blades in the Dark. There's a few. I've been running a lot of indie games and playing in a lot of indie games, and really over the last 16 months or so, really trying to get into as many as I can, both for its own sake as well as for the sake of getting a more comprehensive understanding of what TTRPGs are and can be, and experience for game design. So over the last just within this year, I think I've played or run in 5th edition, of course, Heart the City Beneath. I played in the Alien RPG by Free League, as well as a version of Mothership called Ruination Pilgrimage. I played a funny game called Cocaine Owlbear. I'm getting ready to run Ryutama. That's a game whose mechanics I'm really interested in. I ran Bluebeard's Bride. Um, Played in a Call of Cthulhu campaign. Played in Dungeon Crawl Classics. A few of these, yeah. And Monster of the Week. There's a good 10 or so. I'm still trying to play some others. But yeah, I have yet to play or run in Blades in the Dark. I've just looked through its rules and especially taken note of how the progress clock sort of is meant to work as a mechanic, because that's a very interesting and also very influential mechanic. There are other games that take the progress clock. I think they might even have it in like Fabula Ultima. Like I've seen the progress clock show up in other places. Do you have any? Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Civilian. Do you have any personal house rules you consistently use? Um, hmm. Consistently use. Yes. Okay. So one house rule that I always have, and okay, so there's two. One of them, which I think everybody does, or almost everybody does with 5e, is you treat DM inspiration as a reroll, right? That like instead of instead of saying I'm going to use my inspiration, and you do it before you make the roll to give yourself advantage, which is rules as written. Almost everybody I know at the table says, okay, so if you make a roll and you fail it, and you have a point of DM inspiration, you can use that inspiration to try again, right? So inspiration is treated as a reroll. I find that's a very, 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 very common thing to do. I always do it. I always treat inspiration as a reroll. And on top of that, I also say, here's how DM inspiration works. If you show up to the game session on time and you help us all get in the mood and get in the same imaginative page by helping start the session by summarizing something from the previous session, right? So I'll usually start the session and I say, all right, everyone, what happened last time? Give me a bit of summary for the last session, and in exchange, I'll give you a point of DM inspiration that you can use for this session, right? There's sort of a house rule that you can only have one point of DM inspiration at a time. They don't transfer from session to session. So the idea is that you've got a little bit of an incentive to show up, help everyone get in the mood by summarizing what happened last time, and then you get your one little reroll for the whole thing. And if players are being extra cool or extra good or extra immersive or extra helpful, they can. And if players are being extra cool or extra good or extra immersive or extra helpful, they can often earn a second point of DM inspiration midway through the session. So that's one set of sort of house rule mechanics I consistently use. As for something that I might use less consistently, Core Artificer's rules for using stress in Darkest Dungeon. That's a mechanic where I've used before. I ran Curse of Strahd with it, and it was really fun. But the players and I sort of agreed that I wasn't piling enough stress on for it to be very interesting as we ran Curse of Strahd. Like, it only really affected the PCs a couple of times over the course of an entire year of playing. So now we're using the stress mechanic in a sort of cosmic horror adventure called Yig Snake Granddaddy that's published by Peterson Games. It's a 4-part. It's an adventure for levels 1 to 16. It has a lot of cosmic horror themes and also a lot of just wacky stuff like time travel and dinosaurs and aliens and things. But I'm using the stress mechanic from Darkest Dungeon as implemented by Core Artificer there too. And we're sort of, the players and I are sort of like tweaking the rules a little bit so that we get the right result, where stress matters and it affects the way you play, and it's more distressing to have stress than it is to have a hit point loss. But also that the game seems, sort of fair, and the very existence of stress doesn't make the game less fun, and that sort of thing. So I'd say like the homebrew mechanic I consistently use is this stuff about DM inspiration and how it works. And then maybe a runner-up that I don't use all the time, but I try to use in games where I want it to be horrific, is the Core Artificer Darkest Dungeon stress mechanic for 5e. Great questions, yeah. Queen Mombi rules, yeah, she does. Um, the Nagpas would make a great antagonist. Now that you mentioned the Skeksis, yeah, yeah, and I think there was like, wasn't there a monster that came out in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes that was basically like Skeksis, right? There were like these super wizardly, like stooping, like vulture people, right? And if you saw one, you'd be like, that's a Skeksis right there, or a Skeksis. Um, I think we might actually have like 5e XPs for Skeksis. Um, Agreed. Yeah. By the way, I love the whole world of the Dark Crystal. It's how I mean, speaking of sources that were already in my imagination, which I brought to a Ravenloft domain, I always imagined the Shadowfell, or not the Shadowfell, the Shadow Rift, that sort of weird Gothic Feywild domain from second edition. I always imagined the Shadow Rift as being a lot like the world of Thra, like the sort of Dark Crystal, where it seems like there are fairy creatures here, but they're sort of bleak and stunted, and kind of some of them are really ugly and bug-like, and eldritch fairies. Uh, well, I do a video on Kalakari, given I've already done Phantasms of Sri Raji. Also, really love your videos. Thank you, Thomas. Well, story with that is I wrote Phantasms of Sri Raji, and there's some things I need to do to fix it. I'm a lot of people like it; they really love playing it. Rogue Watson said it's one of the best high level adventures for 5e he's ever seen. I don't know if he maintains that opinion today, but he did when I released it. But the problem is that at first the problem was that we didn't have any good maps. So then I took a couple months to hire a fellow to just put some maps together, and I released a free map pack made with Incarnate for that. So then the map problem was solved. But then the other problem is just I wrote Phantasms of Sri Raji early on in my sort of enthusiasm for trying to write and design game materials, and the monsters are just not that hard. The monsters are actually kind of broken. When I was writing the monsters, I was actually playing with a group of players who didn't really optimize, who didn't really lean into tactics, who sort of played in a very sort of light way that didn't pursue combat as a rigorous part of the game. And this shows, because if you have a high level party that know what they're doing, all the monsters that I pitch in Phantasms, except for like the very end guy Arijani, who's, if anything, is a little overpowered. Like they're all just pillows and like kittens and things. Like you can take them out way too easily. So I need to update the monsters in Phantasms, release a free monster pack. And I've sort of been putting that off. But the idea is that I would love to update Phantasm so it's no longer, so the monster part isn't kind of broken. And then I could announce that with a Kalakari video, and maybe write like a second riff on the domain. That's basically what's kept me from doing one sooner. But I do plan on doing one for sure. I mean, there's no way I video, because I wrote that whole adventure that was set in Sri Raji. So that's got to be within my wheelhouse. So I'm absolutely planning on doing one. I did contact Ajit George when I was doing the video on Naranjan, and I really loved Naranjan, the sort of weird ashram run by a shadow dragon domain. That was a really cool domain. I loved his vision for it, and I loved the sort of authenticity and care that he brought in the writing to that domain. When I wrote to him, he was very receptive and very kind, and like he was actually like, we went back and forth talking about like the inspirations for the domain, both sort of adventuresome and philosophical. And he also wrote the Kalakari domain. And so yeah, I would love to do a Kalakari thing. It's not the next one on my list, but it's on there. I've got an existing obligation to make one for sure. And thank you very much. I'm glad you love the videos. Which classical tales from the Brothers Grimm or other such authors would you like to make a domain out of, or a domain that includes many or all of these? Okay, so So when it comes to folklore generally, I am interested in a domain themed around Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. I love what David Lowery did with that tale in his movie. I just love the film. It has a lot of interesting, sort of like not just interesting cinematography and interesting ideas about how magic should look and how it should function, but it also has lots of interesting symbolism. Not only in the take for instance the title, right? The Green Knight. You would think that the title refers to the supernatural figure who visits Arthur's court, right? The guy who looks like the Green Man on horseback, who issues the challenge. That's the Green Knight, right? But the movie is also about Sir Gawain, a man who's very inexperienced to chivalry. He's new to knighthood. He's in this sense green, right? In the sense of being like new, like he's a green knight in that sense, right? And there's lots of little clever things. So, anyway, I'm getting off topic. I think it would be neat to explore, uh, these folk tales. I was mentioning this sort of when the stream just started too, but I'm interested right now, at least, in folk tales where a lot of the horror comes from an obligation that the protagonist has agreed to, right? Like sort of, all right, you agreed to this. I'll see you in, you know, 1 year in Yuletide hence or whatever, right? Where it's like the horror that comes with the Green Knight is the fact that you agreed to go get your head chopped off. You agreed to it. You promised it, right? It's kind of like a horrifying obligation you must fulfill. I'm also made to think of Rumpelstiltskin and the horrifying obligation of like, this guy's like, all right, I'll be back to collect your baby when you have it, right? That's horrifying, right? It's absolutely terrible, right? There's a fake creature that's going to come and eat your baby. Um, like, but you promised he could have it, right? So again, it's like an obligation. So I'm interested in these sorts of tales. I'm in the process of like doing more research on these where because I think you do have this logic in a lot of sort of folklore from Central Europe and these sort of fairy tales where the fairy makes some kind of bargain with you, and part of the bargain is you agree to do something, and it's only after you make the agreement you realize, oh, this is bad, isn't it? Oh no, right? Like it's not until um, it's only after Gawain agrees to exchange. It's not until um, it's only after Gawain agrees to exchange blows with the Green Knight then he realizes what he's in for. So I would lean into those. I'm really into the idea of like horrific obligations or horrific duties or you know uh, some sort of agreement that you can't get out of. You might group like the stuff like the bargain of Dr. Faustus and stuff in there too, but I'm not sure if that fits in the same way. It's an interesting question. Um, that was a great question. Thank you. Yeah. It's late in my time zone. Just wanted to say congrats on the 2K. You deserve way more. Thank you very much, the Shropshire Dungeon Master, and to you. Thanks so much. Let's yeah. Thanks to everyone for helping support the channel. I started this channel a couple years ago, and I thought I had some neat ideas for adventures that would be useful for people, and it's so refreshing and heartwarming to see that I was right about that. So thank you so much. Will I eventually adapt the previous edition's domains and make adventures out of them? Like Rokushima Taiyu, for example. Yeah, yeah. Or Vorostokov or Verbrek. Yeah, well, uh, some of them I absolutely did. Like even a little ways into this series, I knew I wanted to adapt the Shadow Rift for sure. That's just a favorite one. I'm still thinking about Scythicus too. Um, the when I did the video suggesting that you can put Sire 1313 into a certain point in the official Shadow of the Dragon Queen Dragonlance campaign, I got a lot of feedback that said, "Oh, but wouldn't it make more sense to put Scythicus in there because it's a Dragonlance adventure? So why not take the Dragonlance domain?" And I mean, I thought like that does make sense in a way, but also isn't the Dark Lord of Scythicus like Lord Soth, and isn't he also like the main villain in Shadow of the Dragon Queen, sort of in the background? How does that supposed to work? Is it like, is it a parallel version of Kryn or? Um, with the same person in it. So I wasn't sure, but it did get me thinking about like what should I do? I mean, what would you in the way that I normally do this? Because, as you may know, my usual method for coming up with adventures is, think of the adventure, but build it around existing materials that people can just grab from existing 5e stuff. Or if not official WotC 5e stuff, something adjacent from like Kobold Press or something that's not so obscure. Um, but yeah, I mean, so a lot of the ones that I really liked from second edition or third edition, they thankfully brought into fifth edition. So I really love the domain of Timor, right? The perfectly clean, town where everyone seems, well behaved and everything seems nice, but then people are all scared of each other and everyone will run away from you. And as soon as night falls, everything shuts up, right? And it turns out that there's like an undercity horror. There's like these weird undercity, this like brood of evil eldritch things underneath. Like I love that domain, and they sort of merged it with the one where Soto the doppelganger was. So um, as Rokoshima Tayu is an interesting one because I think what the idea was supposed to be is I swear the writers seem to be inspired by Kurosawa's film Ran, which is a sort of samurai themed adaptation of King Lear, where in the place of Lear's feuding daughters, who sort of destroy his legacy, there's the nobles feuding samurai sons. And like I don't think there was ever an adventure released for second edition or for that version of Ravenloft that featured Rokoshima Tayu. I got the impression from reading Domains and Denizens, or the second edition guide. I got the impression that it's supposed to be something like Ron. It's supposed to be something like this town is, or not this town, this land is sort of torn apart and feuds over dominance and conquest and who's the real heir to this land. And they're all sons feuding with each other, and the Dark Lord is the ghost who's helpless to just kind of witness it. And that's sort of like very King Lear. And I don't know how you would run a King Lear adventure, like the PC. I mean, you can have the PCs be like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern type characters who are the like sort of, in the foreground as all the dramatic Lear stuff is happening in the background, only occasionally involving them directly, or maybe you have them play some part in the Lear narrative. I don't know who you would have them play though. The fool, or I don't know. It's an interesting puzzle. I don't think it's impossible. It's like a puzzle to like unlock or solve of how you would run something that is inspired by King Lear as well as feudal Japan, but run it as like a Ravenloft adventure. So I don't. I mean, as you can tell, because I'm thinking aloud about how to do it. I haven't actually seriously planned to do Rokoshima Tayu. Nor Verbrek or Vorostakov. Not that I considered them and thought, oh, I won't do that, right? Like it doesn't interest me at all. It's just that I hadn't had it on my list of domains to think about. The second edition domains that haven't been brought into fifth edition that I was thinking about were like the Shadow Rift and Sithicus. I'm interested in Markovia, but they also brought that into fifth edition. That's the Island of Dr. Moreau domain. So they brought that in there. I mean, there's the domain of, like, if you want to go way back, there's the domain of Arak. Remember the domain of Arak? It was like the weird drow domain of dread. Like that would be a fun one to play with, maybe. You'd have to be careful. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, Arak is definitely one of those domains that had like sort of a gendered horror theme, and you'd want to think carefully about what the conflict is and who's being represented as a villain. In my experience, aren't players just a little too savvy to make horrible obligations? How would you overcome that at all? Yeah, that's okay. So one of two ways. That's a really good question. Of how would you run an adventure where it's based around the idea of a horrible obligation, right? One is you try to do what the Green Knight himself did, right? Like issue a challenge, right? and especially like try to challenge the PCs to do a thing that according to their character sheet they're really good at, right? So like challenging the barbarian to a contest of strength, challenging the rogue to a to see who's quickest, and have the person issuing the challenge look as though they're quite capable of losing, right? Right. So try to tempt them into it, right? So this little weakling is like, I'll arm wrestle you, barbarian, right? And the barbarian's gonna think, oh, okay. And then you can, let them win the challenge, right? And they'll love it. They'll be like, ha, of course I get a +7 to my strength, and you got a plus what? Nothing? So they'll be thrilled to take up the challenge and win if they're enthusiastic about their, abilities on their character sheet. And then after that, you can just do the same thing and say like, okay, well, hocus pocus, gius gius, right? You must, travel to yonder chapel and meet me, 12 nights hence, and I'm going to beat you this just as hard as you beat me, right? And you could like, at that point, I mean, I think the problem would be more like railroading, than having them take up the challenge, or make the agreement. Another way that you could do it, instead of trying to tempt them into it, is to just have it be built into the story by fiat. Even you could have it in the session 0, right, and be like, we're going to run a short campaign, we're going to run a short adventure, and the premise is that you have a family curse, right, where you are obligated at the age of 5 and 20 to da 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 da, or something. Like you might be able to like start out the players having already made the agreement. And in response to the question of, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense, why would my character have agreed to this? You can be like, that was in the session 0, that was in the buy-in. And you make sure that you have it in the session 0 and in the buy-in. Like how in my Tempest adventure, I just sort of say, let the PCs be, people who were raised by the hag, right? The haggish lord of the Lorinda. Just say that the PCs were raised by her. So you just sort of start out, and that way you avoid the question. Well, how did my PC become to be trapped by this hag in the first place? Why was I so stupid to get caught by her? Right? You just say, no, that was settled before. And a third way that you might try to do it now, you might not. The adventure might not be about the PCs having the obligation. It could be someone that the PCs care about, or someone that they're connected to, either by circumstance or something else. And then it's not so much that they have to go to the chapel and get their heads cut off by the Green Knight or whatever, or give their firstborn away, but instead Lady Agatha does, and we all love Lady Agatha. We don't want her to, right? You might try to. There's a third way. You might try to just involve not the PCs directly in a horrific obligation, but in a proxy character that the PCs have a reason to care about, either because the players care about her or him or them, or because in the session 0 you've sort of said, here's one of the goals is for you to protect and look out for this one character. Come up with a reason why your character likes them, or those are 3 ways. You could either tempt them by playing to what the PCs are good at according to their character sheets. You could try to sort of start the campaign or start the adventure with them already having gained the horrific obligation, or you could connect the horrific obligation to another sort of character that the PCs have a reason to want to protect or work with. That's a good question. Yeah. You do have great ideas. Thank you. I hope so. Thanks. I direct my DM to your Darkon video, and he adapted that, and we played through it in the game I play in. Oh, that's awesome. That's great. I must repeat, of course, that my Darkon adventure, I just took 5th edition materials and I used them to kind of remix and repeat and reflavor Lisa Smedman's adventure, When Black Roses Bloom. But like her, the idea of the mirrors that are being used to change history so the Dark Lord can escape, that's all ripped off from Smedman's excellent adventure. But I'm really glad that you enjoyed my riff on it, and thanks. Hope it's fun at the table. Yeah. Which D&D monster do you think should be presented in a truly as a truly horrific monstrosity, but it isn't. Hmm. So what's kind of a silly or just a like a germane monster that doesn't get presented as horrific often enough? Uh, two come to mind. So one of them, I mean, I guess when you think about it, a lot of D&D monsters just are horrific, right? If you think about a basilisk, right? Like being petrified is utterly horrifying. That's some real body horror, is being turned to stone. So anything that does that has real potential. A Medusa, for instance, or what in classical mythology you would call a Gorgon, but in D&D you call a Medusa, even though Medusa is a name. I would also think, what about the rust monster? Right? Nobody ever fears the rust monster, but if you think about like tetanus, right? Or you think about the horror of getting infected with rust, right? Like what that does to your body and how it can like cripple you and cause you all kinds of pain and right? The idea that the rust monster is a walking ball of blood poison that you don't even want to touch, right? Like I assume you wouldn't want to even be near a rust monster's lair, right? It's probably just covered in well, rust everywhere. Probably lots of jagged edges of undigested metal. If your boots aren't absolutely thick, you might cut your foot, and then now you got the horrible tetanus poison. I can see how the rust monster could be run as a horror monster, and I doubt that it often is. So there's one, is the rust monster. I bet more people have run petrifying monsters as horror monsters. I bet that is more common, but I don't see it very often. And then maybe I don't know. I always think plants can be pretty scary. Um, Plants can be really horrifying. I love the both in well, I haven't read John Wyndham's novel, but I love the old 60s film adaptation of The Day of the Triffids, right, with these weird plant monsters. And I think a lot of the plant monsters, they're not quite run as horror uh, monsters as much as they're just sort of like more, like here's some goblins, here's a shambling mound, right, without like really stressing how terrifying one of those things would be. I mean, plants are so utterly different from us, right? So phylogenetically distant, right? That they may as well be eldritch abominations, right? Just they're so different from us, and especially if you look at, like some of the wild plants that are out there. There's some very strange kinds of fungi. There's at least one plant I learned about in college biology, which converts its like its photosynthetic output as something more like heat than it is like sugar. So like it heats itself. I can't remember what it's called, but plants are very scary. I would also suggest plants. Um, do people run oozes as horror monsters? I wonder. Seems like they could be. Like if you think about the Blob, right, or that movie The Stuff. Um, oozes make great horror monsters, and I don't think they're often run that way. Do we have a blob domain? I don't think we have a blob domain. Speaking of missing domains in the Ravenloft gamut, do a blob domain or a sort of toxic waste domain. Oh yeah, speaking of old second edition domains that I thought would be fun for fifth edition, revamping is Nozos, right? The domain of Nozos. That's a wretched place, right? Nozos is like, you know, Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, the Ravenloft domain, right? It's like where everything natural and green has been utterly destroyed, and there's piles of trash everywhere, industrial smog clouding the sky. You have to assume that the technology level is like early, 20th century, late 19th century, grim dark Eberron kind of thing. I bet you could take some Eberron materials and sort of like reskin them and do a Nausos thing going on. Piles and piles of trash and poison, nowhere to like get clean, disease. Yeah, like Nausos from second edition would be a fun one to bring back in. Absolutely. Is that Shadow Desk Hold behind you? Yes. Yeah, this is I think that's the top floor of it, maybe middle floor. It's one of the floors. I actually have the other two floors in maps of equal size, rolled up just sort of off camera. When I ran my version of the Shadow Rift adventure, which I actually ran twice with very very different sorts of things. Like actually the first time I did it, it was for a Pathfinder group, and then after that I did it for a 5e group. And in a lot of cases, the maps that I suggested using in the video for the Shadow Rift, they didn't exist yet, so there were other things, but this did. Um, and yeah, this is one of these like giant maps. You stretch across a couple of tables, and you cover the rooms up with bits of black fabric or cloth, and you lift them up as the PCs explore. And every one of those squares there is big enough to actually put 4 regular sized minis in, right? So they're effectively like 10-foot squares, like what the map suggests. Definitely, yeah. I've done this a lot with a lot of maps at the FedEx store. I don't do it as often because ever since COVID, I've pretty much just played online with Roll20 and Discord. But if you play in person, I think this is one solution to the problem of how to do mapping that sometimes works. Is if the map is simple enough and it's also just in black and white, you can sometimes get away with just like go to a FedEx or Kinko's or whatever and print out a big old thing. It only costs a couple bucks and works pretty well. But yeah, it's Shadow Duskhold. That is an awesome dungeon, by the way. What a fun fantasy sort of Cthulhu horror, Eldritch horror dungeon. Are there any creatures that you specifically like mechanically? There are mechanical features in general that I like. I really think it's fun when creatures have legendary features or no, the mythic trait. The mythic trait. I love it when bosses have sort of different forms, that they go through, right? Where you're fighting, the vampire, and then the vampire, screams and turns into a demon that has different attacks and maybe even different strengths and weaknesses, and it gives a fight a sense of depth. In terms of monsters that are my favorites, well, okay, I bet fond viewers of the channel know that I just love gallows speakers. I love gallows speakers. There are a couple reasons why I love them. One is that they have that attack where they can hit multiple targets with sort of this psychic damage thing, this sort of attack that hits multiple targets. And then also, they have a little bit of built-in kind of role play where, what the gallows speaker is doing when they attack is they're projecting horrifying memories of having been killed or having died, right? And those memories go sort of directly into the target's minds. And so you can use a gallows speaker as not only a scary and formidable monster, but also as one that can deliver exposition in a sort of unique way. So I really like gallows speakers. Okay, so also I found that if you have like druids and rangers, especially in your party, it's pretty fun to run. And this isn't so much for the horror adventures, although I am doing it in one adventure. But like dinosaurs can be pretty fun because druids and other creatures that can affect beasts, they love to take control of a dinosaur, right? This is like, the advice Jenny D gives where she says, shoot your monks, right? Or at least do it once the monks have the ability to catch and throw back the arrows, right? Because, if you shoot your monks, you give them an opportunity to do the cool thing that they can do when they get shot at, right? And similarly, if you have like druids or rangers in your party, someone where you can, affect beasts, control them, calm them down, stop them from hitting you. It's fun if you have dinosaurs there, because then they can practice that stuff on a dinosaur. So I guess some creatures there that I like mechanically. What's my take on humor at the table during a horror adventure? Do you try to limit it to ensure immersion, or do you let it happen, or is there a limit? That's a really good question. I've found that because players are having fun together in their imagination, like almost any tabletop game that I play has some element of humor to it. The players just kind of bring it there. So you don't want to get bothered by it. Humor will show up. And when it does, I think the idea is like try to use the humor as a helpful contrast with the really scary stuff. So um for a lot of stuff I think of like the session zero. Um this is something that came up when I was playing when I was getting ready to run Heart the City Beneath, which I just finished a campaign of. One thing that a player pointed out is it would be really helpful to establish sort of in our session zero that this is intended to be a horror game. The mood is intended to be pretty bleak and scary, and there's supposed to be some really mysterious sorts of things. So, if you have an opportunity to lean into that, to share an imaginative space with me where the monsters are scary, where they really are weird and gross, try to, join with me in doing that. We're going to try to have fun together doing that, you know, and sort of try to establish in session zero that like, we're going to, sort of have a group effort, um, to tell a scary story and to get ourselves into a spooky mood. And as long as you have player buy-in, and then you can sort of, if things get too silly at some point, you can sort of just remind your players of the buy-in and be like, okay, but seriously, he just murdered your friend and is now eating his kidneys. So let's take this seriously. This is gross, right? And try to like bring him back into the mood. Um, I think that if you're in a circumstance where the players aren't taking the horror stuff seriously at all, despite having player buy-in and despite you sort of doing your best to work positively towards that, it could just be that there's a mismatch in styles of play, right? There are definitely certain kinds of players where no matter what system they're playing, they're gonna want to be silly with it, right? Where it's like, oh my god, this is gonna be hilarious. What game are we playing again? Bluebeard's Bride. Sweet. Okay, well, this is gonna be hilarious, right? And it's like it doesn't like the fact that it might be a horror game or a mystery game or whatever. It's something that doesn't register in the same way to all players. For some people, the activity of playing a TTRPG is an activity, the point of which is to laugh and have fun with friends. So why shouldn't you be joking around whenever you have, the inclination, right? And that can just be a mismatch of player style. I don't think that's like a wrong way to play, but it's definitely a way that I play a different way, and I imagine if you're asking this question, you do too. But the short answer is I try to secure player buy-in in a session zero, and just have it be part of the session zero that like, our goal as a table is going to try to cultivate a certain mood, a certain kind of story theme. So we're gonna aim at something that feels like Dracula, everyone. Um, and then in addition to that, there's of course all the narrative techniques and storytelling techniques that you can use to try to bring out that mood. Especially when you're running a horror game, I think it's I prefer not to name the monster. I prefer to just describe the monster and to do so in ways that emphasize how weird and creepy it is. I'll talk about some shambling, stooping, vaguely humanoid figure with curling horns and slavering jaws, which strides with a gorilla like lope towards you, right? And I won't necessarily say, oh, it's a forest troll, right? But because if you say forest troll, like mine goes to stat block goes to, okay, so I'm going to roll this dice and use my fire attack, and right, and that kind of, it could break the immersion. So I think this is an old trick. They even recommend doing this in the old second edition Ravenloft guides. But when it comes to bringing out the scary, bringing out the scary, I like to describe the features of monsters. And sometimes players will react to that by trying to guess what the monster is. It's like, oh, I wonder if that's like a black pudding or a, and I think it's good to try to. I never confirm, but I can like encourage, right? So if they ask us like, oh, is that a black pudding? I'm like, that's a really good question, right? And then they're going to try to do something to see if it's a black pudding, and then they can get excited about how that hypothesis is either confirmed or disconfirmed. Um, And so that way you sort of make the encounter with a monster a little bit of exploration and sort of puzzle solving, puzzle as well as just a combat encounter. Um, uh, take on humor at the okay, right. Blob domain, Obelix. Oh yeah, and Obelix would be a great horror. Yeah, I think that one was made for a horror campaign. I think the Obelix came out like that was in Mordenkainen's, and Mordenkainen's was written at the time where they were already, I think, planning to do a Van Richten's guide, because they had like 6 or 7 books projected ahead, and they had special code names. Um, um, Final form. When I'm a player, what do I lean toward playing? Okay. So I have to confess, I don't know if this is because of my taste for horror fiction, or whether it's because I'm a forever DM and I just see things from the other side of the screen. But I I think it's fun to play ill-fated characters. So if I'm playing 5e, I don't make a character that will die on purpose. That can ruin the fun for the other players, and it can also, it could, be an obnoxious way of making sure that I'm in the spotlight because I'm the one dying or whatever. I don't want to do that. But I'm definitely a player where I do not mind if my character dies. If you kill my character, that's cool. I hope it happens in a way that teaches the other characters a lesson and is exciting, and maybe even involves some loss. It's like, oh no, we love Sir Morton or whatever. Um, I think it's cool when my characters die in a way that makes sense and that is deserved. Um, and I think it's fun, and I just roll up another character, right? So that's one thing I sort of lean into when I play is, if there's something that seems like it might be dangerous to do, but not entirely irrational for an adventurer to do, and nobody else wants to do it, my character is only too happy to, right? Like okay, I'll walk across the suspicious tiled floor. I mean, I'm going to be careful, of course. One of us has to do it, but why not? You know. As for character classes, I haven't played many of the character classes. I DM 5th edition much more often than I play it. So when I do play a PC, I try to just pick a class I haven't played yet. So I've played a character who's a warlock. I've played a character who's a uh, uh, druid. Yeah, the Circle of Spores druid. Um, and I've played a character who was a monk. I'm currently playing a Gloomstalker Ranger in the Hit Point Press's Hekna campaign. I ran Hekna last year. It's absolutely delightful. It's my favorite 5th edition published 5th edition adventure, including horror adventure. I'm playing through it now, having run it before, and my PC is a fluffy red squirrel the size of Danny DeVito, who is a Gloomstalker Ranger, and it's pretty fun. But what I lean towards playing class-wise is just whatever I haven't played yet, as well as whatever I think might round out the party. I'm definitely one of the players where if it seems like the party is lacking X and we need an X, I'm only too happy to play the X too. I like to play in ways that help the whole group and help the story go along, help the DM sort of run the game. I tend to pay attention to what the other players are doing and think like, well, how can I help this along, sort of thing. When it comes to other systems and other games, there's just different options and different things. What about old editions Ravenloft monsters do you wish? What about old editions Ravenloft monsters you wish they would have given us? I wish they would have made the Red Widow. Yeah, the Red Widow would be cool. I really like the Death's Head tree. I know that we get stats for the Death's Head, and we get the little note that says, "Oh yeah, for a Death's Head tree, just use an animated tree. Just use an awakened tree, bro." And I appreciate that. I mean, it's definitely good. Reskinning is very convenient and easy, and so like that advice I don't think is bad advice. But it would be cool to it would be pretty cool to have like an actual Death's Head tree thing where it spawns, a certain number of heads, like 1d4 heads as a legendary action every round or something, and like just a little more detail on the Death's Head tree, because that is a lovely monster. There's also, I really liked the Shadow Unicorn from the third Monstrous Compendium, third second edition Ravenloft Monstrous Compendium. The Shadow Unicorn was just like an evil unicorn, and it was like malicious, and you got some lore about it. That's a really cool monster. I know that that you have a makeshift evil unicorn in the Avatar of LaRue from that one adventure in the Candlekeep Mysteries thing, and I suggested using it in the Darkon adventure. But I'd like to see a shadow unicorn. Some of the golems that were in second edition were just wild. Like I remember there was a brain golem, there was like a glass golem. We got Grimishkas. I'm glad we got Grimishkas. I'm glad we got Carrionettes. Oh, that's a good question. Weren't there some like cat people called Paka or something? I don't know. Maybe we have enough cat people in 5e. We already have the Leonin and we've got the Tabashi. Maybe we don't need more cat people. Yeah, that's a good question. I'll think about that. Let me grab my while I'm talking. Let's grab the other Ravenloft thing. I've got the monstrous. There we go. This guy. The Appendix 3, Creatures of Darkness, Ravenloft Monstrous Compendium. This is one where, like, if you could only pick so many second edition Ravenloft books, this is a great one. It's got plenty of implied domain lore, as well as some neat monster lore and monster tactics and ecology and stuff. This is back when almost every monster entry in any book for D&D would have a section called ecology. And it would sort of explain, like, here's how these creatures function in a habitat where you find them. Here's what they avoid, and here's how they feed. And we'll tell you something about, like, whether they're like an ambush predator and stuff that's kind of useful. Some of the material that you now get from, like, Keith Amon and, like, the monsters know what they're doing, sort of like some instructions on how to run it. Cool monsters in here. The Boo Ray is like some evil fae, maybe one of those. Okay. I'm gonna look through this as we're talking. The Red Widow for sure. Which books from previous editions would you suggest to someone who's only read 5e books? Oh, well, speaking of which, I mean, the Monstrous Compendium, if you like monsters, and especially if you like reading about their lore and stuff, I might suggest this one. I already mentioned my favorite Adventures by Lisa Smedman. The Castles Forlorn box set is really great. I would suggest that. There's, the adventure When Black Roses Bloom. That one is absolutely great. It's a good way to get to know Dragonlance as well as Ravenloft. I've got the there's some neat lore in Van Richten's Guide to Fiends also, just in the way that fiends are supposed to interact with the dark powers and the mists. In fact, I think you learn a lot about the metaphysics of Ravenloft by looking at what the old edition had to say about fiends and the way that the fiends are supposed to function in the Shadowfell. So those would be a couple. I mean, if you're looking for the lore stuff, Van Richten's guides were pretty cool. I really enjoyed Van Richten's Guide to the Walking Dead and Van Richten's Guide to the Shadow Fae. Those are later. Those are post second edition, but their lore is great. The lore is delightful. The Gazetteers are pretty good too. I guess I'm not just listing all the books, but Van Richten's Guide to the Walking Dead. I love that one. Recommend it heartily. Van Richten's Guide to the Shadow Fae too. Definitely recommend it heartily. I think that's the first occurrence of one of the first occurrences of the Foxglove twins. Come to think of it, or at least the first time I ever saw them. Let the players name it. Do I have a fun anecdote at the table I haven't told yet? I'm sure there's plenty. I mean, recently a group of PCs in a game I was running, they were on a mission to basically hijack a shipment of magical items, and the shipment was being transported across a veldt, across like a big old sort of North African plain, and it was being transported on a Diplodocus, like on a giant sauropod dinosaur. And there were serpent folk piloting the dinosaur, right? These snake people with flared cobra hoods and scaly faces and fangs, and all their weapons are dipped in poison and stuff. And so there's this Diplodocus striding across the land, and it's carrying magic items, and it's guarded by these alert snake folk. And the PCs had to like stop the shipment at any cost. So, and I'm running this same adventure for two different groups of players at the same time, and it's interesting to compare how they react. But one group of players, there was a magic user, there was a magic using PC who cast grease on the Diplodocus. So you had this and the Diplodocus failed its save. So you had this massive sauropod dinosaur, like this giant, dinosaur that just like slipped and fell. Um, and it changed the tide of the battle. That was really hilarious. There was another occasion. There have been a couple of occasions where through teamwork, the party ends up with a flying, invisible, enlarged barbarian, right? Which is just ridiculous. But if you have multiple spellcasters and they're all concentrating, right, you send out your flying, invisible, enlarged barbarian to do great battle with monsters, which now are no match for it. And that's pretty fun. That happened a couple times. We had a flying barbarian moment in Curse of Strahd, where the flying barbarian just like soared up and took down one of Strahd's brides near the end of the game. And then recently we had a flying barbarian incident where the barbarian flew over, grabbed like a huge heavy statue, which he could do as enlarged, and then like dropped it on the head of an enemy and killed him, which is pretty fun. I think he only did like 2d6 or 46 damage or whatever it was, but it was some damage. It was good. It was respectable. But getting a Diplodocus to do a pratfall was a pretty fun recent anecdote that just happened a couple of weeks ago, or a week ago. No, 2 weeks ago. Fluffy Red Squirrel would not have guessed. Yeah, well, this is a campaign where this campaign I'm playing in, a lot of the other players have chosen kind of sillier characters to run, and they're sort of leaning into some of the whimsy that you can have when you make a fantasy character. In this case, it works with the horror setting because the horror setting is like a demonic, nightmarish circus, right? It's a circus, so the enemies are like horrible clown monsters and weird animals, like circus animals that are all sort of mutated and stuff. And so like the fact that every other enemy is like gleeful and sort of fiendish in their silliness, it means that our silly characters don't really ruin the vibe. If anything, it's kind of an interesting contrast. Have I written for Quoth the Raven Netzine? I haven't. I've definitely seen it around. It's like is that one of the ones that the online, like the Kargatane group, like what are they called? They have the Fraternity of Shadows. Is that one that they put out? Because I love reading their stuff, especially that sort of like those net books that they put out, and all that older sort of Ravenloft expanded lore stuff was really cool. And I read it a lot when I was younger too. Sort of haven't kept up with it as much. But I don't know if Quoth the Raven is affiliated with that or if it's something else, but it would be cool. It would definitely be cool to like write for Quoth the Raven. I don't know if you need an invitation or if they just take open submissions. But I wouldn't be opposed to doing such a thing. I mean, I write so much Ravenloft stuff and think about it all the time anyway. It's like, why not? Ravenlore's back and has a stat block for me. Hey, if I were a Dark Lord, oh man, okay, first of all, that would not be fun. But if I were one, what would if I were actually a dark, like, what would my curse be? What would my domain look like, and how would I close the borders? Okay. All right. So I would probably be a faculty member at a school where I was forever taunted by the unreachable goal of getting my students to do the reading or understand what I'm talking about. And I would be like, my curse would be I couldn't ever reach them. I can't get them to understand me. They're distracted. It could be they're distracted by monsters, or maybe they are like monsters, or they get turned into monster. Something like that, like the tortured, like professorial fiend or something. That certainly fits with the with the troubles I have in my ordinary life. Is just like the difficulty of being a teacher. And to be fair, my students are great. I like my students; they're nice, and we all have occasional students that we don't like and stuff. But for the most part, my students are great. But I would love there to be like a school domain, right? Where I mean, I wouldn't want to run this, because if you run this, then you have the danger of like running a domain where it's going to be normal or even encouraged to do like violence against children or something. That's not good. So maybe like collegiate age, like a evil Strixhaven or something, maybe. I would close the borders by way of it'd be like an earthquake drill or something that they do inside of schools, where now you have to close all the doors and everybody duck and cover or something. It'd be sort of a horrifying domain. If you remember how scary it was in school when you had to do some kind of emergency drill, right? And you're all supposed to pretend that everything. Imagine being in a school where you can't get out, right? And every time, like, it seems like there might be an opportunity, then you have another drill and everybody gets under their desk. And if you're not caught under, maybe a monster comes shambling through the halls. And I don't know. I'd probably try to make some kind of academic domain of dread, if possible. Right? Not so much centered on like the mad scientist laboratory, but like, I don't know, the mad professor's classroom or something. Makes me think of a funny ghost story, which I'll get to in a second. But probably something like that. Do I run or play games with my viewers? I haven't yet. Open to the possibility. The problem is that I'm so busy with the Kickstarter project, and then just making these videos, and then I also just run games, with people I know outside of the YouTube community. That like finding the time to do it would be the tricky thing. I'd have to schedule it, but I'm not opposed to it. I mean, the folks that chill out in my Discord, they're all really great. They're nice people. Playing a game with them would seem awesome. So not opposed to it at all. But I haven't before. I mean, I've some of the people I play with in real life became viewers of my channel because they're my friends and they support me and stuff, but not the other way around. What are my thoughts on restricting races, classes during character creation? What's about the right amount of restriction for thematic reasons, not balance? Yeah. If you're running 5e, this is very tricky. In general, I don't like to restrict. I don't like to tell players not to play certain classes or races or backgrounds. I like to give players the opportunity to enjoy a fantasy of running whatever sort of PC they would like to. But there are certain campaigns where like this would be a little too silly. So first of all, my first thought on those kinds of restrictions is do it in session 0. Do not pull this out anytime during the campaign. This is something where like you definitely need to have it as also when you take care of it in session 0, do it by way of a general rule that you sort of address to everybody. Don't wait until one of your players proposes a character and then you look at it and you say nah, and then you come up with why. Right? It's so much easier and so much better if you come up with the restrictions earlier and then you explain them and you present them to everyone, as opposed to like you came up with a reason after Joe showed you his ridiculous bunny rabbit guy or whatever. I tend, again, especially if you're playing in a pretty wild high fantasy sort of campaign, the more high fantasy it is, the easier it is to let in wacky PCs. But in the campaign I'm running right now, the Yig Snake Granddaddy one, I said in session 0, you can play whatever sort of character you want as long as they're not a snake person of any kind, right? Whether it's a Yuan Ti or whether it's some other homebrew snake person, we're just not doing that. This is a campaign where serpent folk are a very specific type of creature, and that creature has lore and mythology, and they are guaranteed to be antagonistic. They are the baddies with whom you cannot identify. there are no good snake people in this campaign because because the ones that you encounter, it's not like they're biologically wired to be evil, but the ones that you encounter are marauding, genocidal time travelers from the Triassic, so or from wherever. So like, I'm happy to restrict an option if it seems absolutely necessary for the story, or for the story. For atmosphere, it's a little trickier, because atmosphere or theme is something that's a little more subjective, right? I you might have a couple of players that are both quite reasonable, and one of them thinks that playing as a Harengon totally makes sense in Curse of Strahd. Why not? Why can't you have a Harengon in Curse of Strahd? And then another person might think, no, absolutely not. Once you have a Harengon in Curse of Strahd, everything is just too silly. It messes up the atmosphere, right? I can see both those perspectives. But because I can also see why it's difficult to restrict based on theme. That's definitely very important to get like buy-in for in the session zero in that case. If you say like, well, nobody can play a draconian in Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen. It's just a kind of monster. You can't play as one. That's easier to justify than if it's a theme thing where the theme is more about like the feel and the atmosphere. So I think the right amount of restriction is, feel free to place restrictions if it's like relevant to the story and to who the antagonists are. With beyond that, for the sake of theme, I think you'd want to be light. I often phrase it as a request, right? I often sort of phrase it this way: is I would really like it if we work together to tell a gothic tale, and because of the nature of the gothic tale, I'd like to restrict player options to just the sort of the most human like of the fantasy races, so that that includes elves and humans and dwarves and halflings, maybe, but please no dragonborn, please no Harengons, please no Tabashi. I just don't think it goes well with the type of tale. If you're really, 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 really dying to play a Harengon, you can talk to me and maybe we can work something out. But I would like to just request that you stick to these. I think we'll all have some fun with the story if we stick to these, right? Like I usually try to phrase it that way, where it's not like like a forbidding, like, no elves, fuck them, right? Like, that's not what it's much more like a request if it's like about the theme or the mood. Whereas if it's about the story or something, like I feel a little more comfortable making the request or making the restriction. But yeah, that's a good question too. I know that Matt Colville has that interesting video where he, I think the video is just called No, right? And it's him talking about why he, doesn't let people play silly elves, because the way that he runs elves, they're a certain type of very mysterious alien creature. And he wants elves in his universe to be like that. And they can't be like that if one of them is a silly guy from the video for Stand and Deliver or whatever it was. So I understand the restrictions for sure. I definitely, I don't go so far as like the old second edition Ravenloft stuff though. Like, I remember in the older second edition, it was kind of like, is like, you shouldn't play anyone that isn't a human. If you play anyone that isn't a human, then everyone else will hate you and they'll try to form a lynch mob with torches and pitchforks and kill you because they'll think you're a monster. So don't play as and I found just it's not, it doesn't seem very rewarding for me to run the campaign that way. I see why, for like lore reasons, it might be sort of spooky and sort of, you could tell an interesting story where that's the cultural atmosphere. But I think in practice, if you try to bring that to the table, you're gonna risk the circumstance of having to like role play or stat out or have an encounter with like a lynch mob or something, and and you're gonna be like role playing fantasy racism and stuff, and it's not as fun in my opinion. I just don't like to role play that stuff. So I kind of dropped the Ravenloft xenophobia that you find a lot in. I mean, I know there's exceptions in second edition Ravenloft, like Darkon was still fantasy metropolis. But I don't restrict like that strongly that way. How do you deal with the paladin's divine sense or spells like detect evil and good when you don't want your PCs to discover your secrets? Oh, that's a great question. That's a great question. Excuse me. So there's a couple ways to go about this. One way that I think is really easy. It might seem a little unfair, um, but you can do it. Is if they're in Ravenloft, if they're in a Ravenloft domain, guess what? There's supernatural evil everywhere, right? Like imagine if you take a compass and you're trying to use it on a mountain made of iron and lodestone, right? Like, geez, like the needle's just going to be going haywire, right? Like if you try to tell which way is north and you're in a magnetic field, right? The compass will cease to be a reliable indicator of where north is. And I could imagine that in a domain steeped in evil, where the land itself is like an undead creature, right? Where there's ghosts everywhere, right? There's a malevolent influence of the Dark Lord everywhere. I could see how maybe a paladin's like ability to, detect evil would go haywire. It'd be like, yeah, it's everywhere. You want me to narrow it down? Sorry, it's everywhere. Now that is kind of the problem with that is it is sort of like a way of taking away their ability, so I'd only use that in certain circumstances. But that's one way to kind of handle it. Another is to have something like Nistel's magic aura or something, because there are these high level spells where it's like you can or like these non-detection spells, right? Like I don't know if mind blank is one of them, but you can have these spells where diviners and like paladins might not be able to sense you if you have this enchantment on. And hey, there's also this: if there isn't a spell that blocks that, or if there isn't a magic item that blocks that, you can make one, right? Like I've definitely had NPCs wear a ring or like an amulet or something, where as long as they wear that, no one can detect that they're a fiend, right? Or as long as they wear this, no one can tell that they're undead, right? Or maybe just like I'm kind of a big fan of spells that only uh evil NPCs have, right? There could just be some kind of spell that an NPC has that you made up. You wrote it for them to use to accomplish one specific effect that doesn't break the game. And no PC will ever learn this spell, but your evil warlock here knows it, right? So it could be just a spell to like, you know, blind yourself from a paladin's sight or something. Um, there's a few options. I mean, yeah, if the purpose, there's also the possibility that the mistake is at the level that the PCs are at. Um, so if you're running like a murder mystery, your PC should not be at a level where they can then, sort of read everybody's mind and, force them to, speak in an aura of truth and stuff like that. That'll just ruin the murder mystery or ruin the question of who's the betrayer. One thing that you might do, another thing you might do is what if you're trying to suss out who the evil betrayer is in a room full of evil people, right? Like suppose everybody's evil, but they're not all guilty of the thing that you're looking for, right? This person's just an evil, pickpocket who's, behaving themselves for now. This person's like an evil heretic who's also not doing anything particularly violent. I mean, just because they're evil doesn't mean that they have to start trouble now. Maybe they're all pretty well behaved, but one of them is in fact the murderer of the mansion or whatever. And you need to find out which of these evil people is the mansion murderer. And being able to detect evil won't help you because they're all evil, right? Or what if it's in a company of fiends, but you need to figure out like, well, which fiend exactly was the one who took the cookie out of the cookie jar? Detecting fiends isn't going to help me, right? Um, this could also be like a fun way to sort of subvert player expectations. Somebody left this as a comment in one of the videos, I believe, where you might start out thinking that there's a werewolf, right? That's like that's on the loose, and you're trying to find out who the werewolf is. And every time you use your ability to like sense the unnatural. It's like it goes off way too much. It's like everywhere. It's like werewolves everywhere. That doesn't make any sense. But then you slowly discover that in fact everyone in the town is a werewolf. Right? You were looking for one. There's 50. And you know there could be some kind of town betrayal like Wicker Man type thing where by the time you discover that they're all werewolves, you also discover that the mystery they asked you to solve was a trick and that they just wanted to get you alone and da 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 da. But yeah, I would think like you could give a magic item to the creature who you don't want to be detected by the paladin. You could surround the paladin with a bunch of other creatures that can be similarly detected but are not the one that the paladin's looking for. You could come up with a spell, one that the paladin's looking for. You could come up with a spell. You could make sure that you start the players out at a level so low that they just don't have that detection. Although, wait, maybe paladins get that at first level. If so, that one won't work. But there's a few ideas. I think a few ideas early on. You know what? I used to be. It's funny you should bring this up, Anarchopossum, because I used to be quite the curmudgeon about a paladin's ability to detect evil in Pathfinder and 3.5, right? Because it always seemed so cheap to me, right? It'd be like I set up this cool, you know, social intrigue situation, right? Who is the thief or the murderer? And then the party comes in and the paladin's like, detect evil is that guy, and then just hits him with a hammer, and it's like there goes my intrigue. And so I just changed it. I moved them all to Ravenloft, and I'm like, detect evil doesn't work anymore. And then later I decided that's too cruel. So instead I replaced it with a detect chaos ability, where like the paladin they couldn't detect evil because they were just in a land that was infused with evil, so it'd just be everywhere. But what they could do is they could detect chaos. They could tell if somebody was prone to betraying their principles, if somebody is prone to lying, but it wouldn't tell them if they're on their side or not, right? And that was a way to like mix it up, is just change the power so that they can't detect evil. They can detect, you know, chaos, or they can detect, you know, like maybe the paladin's power is tweaked where they can detect non-humans or something. It's like, great, well that's going to go off for both elves and werewolves. Now what, right? There are ways maybe to change things a little. I was running Fistandia's Manor from Candlekeep, and my party wizard used detect magic, and the whole room lit up, and she was kind of disappointed. Yeah, that's great. that's exactly that's the sort of thing that you could do, where it's like if what the party thinks they need to do is find the one magic ring that's hidden here somewhere, it's not going to help if you know every single thing is a magic item. That will mean that they actually have to search. They can't just go detect magic. It's there. Okay, done. What's the next quest? Right. So yeah, good application of the same sort of advice. What subject do I teach? I teach philosophy, academic philosophy. So my area of specialization is in metaphysics and ancient Greek stuff. But I've been teaching ethics and ethics classes and logic classes for the last, I think, decade. You know, philosophy departments get their funding gets cut all over the place. So you know, being able to teach a fun, fancy class like metaphysics, it's a rare opportunity, but at least for now, no administrator feels totally comfortable saying, let's cut all the money for ethics, or like, let's cut the money for logic. What use is logic, right? If you're an administrator who gets caught saying that, you're going to have some egg on your face, right? It's going to sound bad if you say we don't care about ethics. It's going to sound bad if you say we don't care about logic. So most philosophy departments, they definitely offer ethics and logic classes, and then depending on how much money you have, they may offer some other things too on the side. But because the bulk of philosophy classes that are pitched to collegiate students are ethics and logic, and I'm an academic philosopher, there you go. I teach lots of ethics and logic. So I've picked up a specialization with it. But yeah, philosophy professor. If you're interested, you can look up my publications. They're all very academic and pretty dry compared to fantasy literature or horror literature or the lore of an amazing world in a tabletop game. Nistel's Magic Aura, I love it. Oh man, I think in Phantasms of Sri Iraji, I even suggest like just put Nistel's magic aura on everything. Just put it on everything. This is a Dark Lord's palace, and he's lived here for centuries. He's had time to cast this spell every single day on everything for longer than 100 days. It's on everything. It's absolutely permanent. And because it's like the final dungeon, it makes sense to kind of just short circuit that thing and prompt a little more resourcefulness and creativity from the intrepid PCs. What I'm doing is it detects a specific evil you know of if you are like attuned to it. Like when a dog sniffs an object to find a specific someone. Oh, that's a cool idea too. That's a really neat idea too. I can definitely see that being a cool uh, uh, sort of mechanic to bring in, where it's like you can detect evil, but you need to be acquainted with it first. You need to have the scent, right? I suppose you might have an extended mechanic where it's like, well, like maybe the paladin can encounter an evil scent that they haven't encountered before, and then maybe if they encounter that one specific scent again, they can identify it, right? So that they don't need to like have it be like shown to them and be like, this is vampire, right? It could just be like, there's something strangely bloody and evil in the air. And then like later on, it's like, hey, this is the same strangely bloody evil thing. And they can put together that it's in fact a vampire or something. That's a cool idea. I like the analogy with bloodhounds. That's a cool thing. I got to bounce, but I just wanted to say your content is awesome and inspires me as a DM. Thank you very, 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 very much, Civilian. It means a lot. It does mean a lot. The pop culture references for imaginative grip has been super helpful for me. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's my phrase. If Matt Colville gets the phrase doobly doo, I think I'm getting the phrase imaginative grip. That's mine. Thank you so much, Civilian. Thanks for tuning in. I guess it has been like an 2 hours and 15 minutes. That's a pretty respectable time for a live stream. Yeah. I don't know if there's any other questions, requests. I feel like I'm winding down here. I will say, of course, and continue to plug the game that I spent some. I will say, of course, and continue to plug the game that I spent some 20 months designing and another 16 months testing and working on with a team. The game 5 Acts, the King in Yellow RPG. You can get a free illustrated 48 page copy of the rules if you just sign up with your email at nilhemoth.com, nilhemoth.com. It's got cool stuff in there. It's got some beautiful art by our two artists, Mel Williams and Sam Fontaine. If nothing else, it's just cool art to get for free and look at. And there's some really neat interpretations of the King in Yellow mythos if you're into that kind of thing. So also if you feel like supporting the channel, I don't have a Patreon. I haven't monetized my channel. So if you ever feel like, oh, I would love to do something material to keep this channel going, that would be a wonderful thing. Is consider backing the Kickstarter. We're going to launch it probably within the next 7 days. We have been preparing to launch. I was going to announce it this evening, but we have to do a couple last things on the website. So, but I'm going to launch it pretty soon. And if it looks like a thing you're interested in, consider getting a copy. It'll be a nice over 200 page book full of cool horror role playing ideas. Just popped in to say, hey, I love your content. Thank you, Duran Card. And wish you had been the philosophy prof at my college. I wish so too, or at least I hope so. As long as your college wasn't a domain of dread, I bet that would be cool. Good luck with 5X Doc. Thank you so much, Duran Card. What horror tale from my state or area could you develop a horror adventure? Ooh. Something in folk horror from North America. I'm thinking North America generally. I don't know about North Carolina specifically because I haven't investigated local hauntings or local cryptids or anything like that. I bet there are some. If anyone is from North Carolina and you've got a suggestion, feel free. But I think just in the way of North American horror, I'd be interested in the Wendigo, both as sort of like a supernatural kind of monster, also as sort of related to the horror of cannibalism and the cultural taboo of cannibalism. I'd be interested in revisiting Clark Ashton Smith's story about a Wendigo and about like how this person ends up like disappearing as they seem to have got drug up into the sky by something. I'd like to develop a horror adventure about the Wendigo, but it would require me to do some careful and I think thoughtful research, because I wouldn't want to get the original cultural myths wrong, or to oversimplify them, or be insensitive to a certain theme that they were really trying to articulate or emphasize. So I'd have to read more than the Clark Ashton Smith for sure. But I would love to check out, like like make a Wendigo tale, I think, as like North American, that as like a distinctive North American monster. I love The King in Yellow. Got to be one of my favorite horror books. Same, absolutely. When I first encountered The King in Yellow in 2012, I was teaching at Moravian College in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, living in a tiny cramped apartment next to the campus. And I had ordered a copy of the text, and I was waiting for the bookstore to receive it. And during that time, I listened to a LibriVox recording of The Repairer of Reputations. And as I listened, I was not only sucked in by the particular prose and the weird description of society's functioning at the beginning, but it became quite clear to me that the person who was telling me the story was absolutely delusional, or there's something seriously wrong with them. And that fascinated me. And the more that came out, the more intrigued I was. At first, just intrigued with this realm of Carcosa, and the sort of the bits of nascent cosmic horror that we get in the snippets of the play. But as I got to know the stories more and more, I realized that they have these other deeper sort of existential and gothic themes. Themes about, loss and death and inevitability, and, love and things. And I think that these are stories that become deeper upon a revisit. And I have to say, like, I absolutely love the contemporary fiction that people are doing, like the contemporary writing that people are doing in the King in Yellow mythos. Like, not the Derlithian stuff where the King in Yellow is just like another appendage to Lovecraft's stuff. Like people that take Chambers on his own terms. There's an anthology called Under Twin Suns: Alternate Histories of the Yellow Sign, and it's got stories by a lot of excellent writers, including John Langan and Kathleen Shiner, and just excellent stories in there that are all authentically King in Yellow stories. Definitely the Robin Laws's book, New Tales of the Yellow Sign. There's a story in here called The Blood on the Wall in the Fortress, and it's one of the best King in Yellow tales I've read. Nicole Cushing, I was introduced to this story through a reading club I'm in. Nicole Cushing has a great story called The Suffering Clown, from this book, The Mirrors. I swear it's a King in Yellow tale. I asked her if it was, and she said no, but I also think she might have been playfully messing with me, because it very clearly is one. It might have been a stupid question of me to ask. But yeah, there's a lot of really excellent contemporary fiction, like that's being written like now-ish, just about, King in Yellow stuff. It's catching on. People are really, and I think this goes back to, people like Carl Edward Wagner and Joe Pulver, people who, like, decade or two ago, three, started to take Chambers on his own terms, and to say never mind the idea of like copy pasting whatever words you read in Chambers into a Lovecraft mythos. Let's take Chambers on his own terms. And definitely our game, sort of does that. The lore of our game does that. And it's great. Yeah, I'm always delighted to hear people are into the King in Yellow and, sort of thinking about it. Definitely, if you're interested, again, get a free copy of our game. Go to nilhemyth.com and, sign up with your email. You'll get a link in your inbox where you can download the PDF. We had the college was a domain of dread. You had bagpipes playing all the time, and there's only like 3 songs they played. All right, that does sound. I'm not sure if I want to be a professor there anymore. I might want to retry. Kidding. If you like cannibalism as a horror theme, I assume you mean, check out the Domain of Gastria. Yes, Gastria is one of these ones that I haven't yet gotten to, but I'll have to do a video on, because that is another sort of like body horror themed uh, domain, and a certain flavor, pun intended, of horror fiction that I haven't quite touched on yet. So that would be, yeah, good suggestion there. Although I love Chambers and The King in Yellow, I really dislike Lovecraft's stories. In my opinion, his writing is a lot less impactful. I can understand that. I mean, I enjoy Lovecraft stuff too, but I think if what you're really appreciating is the stuff that makes Chambers unique in that tradition of fiction, then yeah, Lovecraft might leave you a little cold for sure. Um, like Chambers stories, the protagonists they have a lot of feeling and character. They're things that they are desperately passionate about that tie into like ordinary life and relationships and ambitions and things. And they're really fleshed out in that way. I, and of course, Lovecraft, he doesn't write characters that way. His characters are almost there just to encounter the spooky thing. They don't have a lot of depth of that sort. The world he writes, the stories he writes, the descriptions, of course, those are lurid and full of depth and skillfully, conveyed. But you're not going to find the sort of romanticism of Chambers in Lovecraft, I think. Um, uh, but yeah, they are certainly very, very different. I did a video. I don't know if you saw it, but I had a video where I tried to explain why the 1991 film The Fisher King it has a lot more in common with The King in Yellow than, say, The Call of Cthulhu does. And that in general, there's like lots of sort of romantic stories about people who are deluded. I think even that weird series based on the Image comic, The Max, where you have sort of the homeless fellow who's also living in an imaginary dimension where he thinks he's heroic and fighting a struggle, and it's not clear from the narrative whether he really is or not. Like that's a very, I mean, it may not seem like it at first, but I think like The Max in that sense also has a lot of kind of King in Yellow feel to it. Um, so does that recent horror film Censor. Censor, Censor. That horror film also has this kind of Chambers-esque narrator who has a lot of concerns and ambitions and seems to encounter some utterly fantastical stuff. But the film also, the narrative also sort of suggests that she's unreliable here. Maybe also Mike Flanagan's film Oculus has some of that sort of unreliable narrator stuff going on. But yeah, that's great. That's great. Highly recommend The King in Yellow. I haven't stopped recommending it for the last like 4 videos I've done or whatever. But I think we're winding down. Looks like the questions are slowing down here and stuff. So thank you everyone for showing up and for asking your questions, participating. Thank you very much for supporting the channel. 2,000 subscribers. That's a huge deal. It's a huge deal to me. When I started this channel, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it was like, just a dozen subscribers. And I thought, wow, that's cool. But I wonder how I could even, and let's hope the channel continues to grow. I'll continue to release Ravenloft videos and other things. So thank you very much, Anarcho-Possum. Thank you, Everything 44, Duran Card, Thomas Wilson, Ravenlore, everyone else who's a civilian victim of the Havana Syndrome, Joshua Zarat, One Ear, everyone who's shown up, the Shropshire Dungeon Master, that person 289, Chad Parker, Mr. Welch, Eduardo Art, and Avalon the Eldritch Horror, Jack Talma Choff. Thanks everyone. Thanks, and have a wonderful evening. I'll see you soon in the next video.